Both Kenworth and Pete are very popular trucks in the trucking industry. I've owned a number of both, and I've been asked by more than a few people which one I preferred better. And I wasn't really sure, so I decided to tally it up, score them both, give them each a Dave score to figure out which one I'd actually liked better. So I picked a few categories and went for it. This video was sponsored by the good people at GP Transco. Did you know that GP Transco recently came out with a 6-month mandatory pay raise for all solo and company drivers? They start you out at 50 cents per mile, and after bonuses and extra pay, most drivers averaged 60 cents per mile last year. Good drivers can expect to make between $76,000 and $88,000 per year. If you're looking for a great carrier, check out GP Transco at gptransco.com. The first category that was important to me was dealership network. Now, both Kenworth and Peterbilt each have over 400 dealerships across Canada and the US. That's a good thing. Both dealerships are well placed throughout the country. They're in just about every major center or city that you can think of. So that's a good thing. So I got reviewing my dealership network experience. I've never ever been turned away from a Kenworth dealer when I needed work done. And you don't pick out a dealer in the middle of nowhere unless you're in trouble, unless you're experiencing mechanical issues. Never ever was I ever turned away from a Kenworth dealership when I needed work. Peterbilt, on the other hand, I was turned away a number of times, and not just me, my friends had the same experience. And it's interesting to note that in almost every case, they were Rush Peterbilt dealers, and the one Rush even told me, come back in a couple of weeks. Just an insane comment for a dealership to make. Shows you how much they valued the business. They weren't even able to order me the part so I could pick it up and fix it myself. So I gave the Kenworth dealership a Dave score of 5 out of 5, but I gave the Peterbilt dealerships a score of 3 out of 5 because I thought that was unacceptable for a good dealership. The second category that I thought was important were the features. And I decided the best way to do this was to break the features down into bunk, cab, and exterior. So let's look at the Kenworth high bunk first. It's got high windows at the top of the bunk, lets in a lot of light. Really like that feature. It's got 2 access doors on the bunk. Really like that feature. The second bed folds right up to the back wall, right out of the way so you don't hit your head when you're sitting on the bottom bunk. Really like that. The only thing I didn't like about the Kenworth bunk was you had to step down into the bunk. So that was the only part of it I didn't like. Peterbilt bunk, on the other hand, had a flat floor. You could step flush into it. So that was a good thing. I did not like the upper bunk in the Pete's because they only did a half flip up. So you could be sitting on the bottom bunk, bang your head on the top bunk. And I did that numerous times. Didn't like that. I ended up ripping the top bunk out. The Pete bunk, only the newer ones, only have 1 hatch door. Didn't like that so much. But Pete, you could, as an option, order a back window on the back wall of the bunk, and that let some light in. But usually you'd tint that anyway, so it didn't let a whole lot in. So you got some light in there. Still, not as impressive. The Kenworth cab, airtight, super airtight. In fact, it was so tight when you closed the doors, you had to put down the window half the time, so it had a really nice cab. The best interior upholstery features in the market, bar none. Dash, no, it was okay, but I thought they could have done better. The thing I didn't like about the Kenworth cab was that you couldn't slide the seat back far enough because there was a back wall for the bunk behind the seats. You couldn't get away from the pedals very far. Didn't have a whole lot of leg room. Didn't like that about the Kenworth cab. The Pete cab, on the other hand, had a whole bunch of leg room. You could slide the seat really far back, and I really liked that. The gauge package in the Pete, really like that, but they're changing that. I've seen the new Pete gauge package. Don't care for that at all. The other thing I liked about the Pete, that it had flat windshields as compared to the Kenworth cab that had a curved windshield. I like the flat windshield way better because you get a much better grip from the windshield wipers. So I rated the cab and the Pete superior to the Kenworth. Not as nice as upholstery wise, but still pretty good. Third thing, the exterior. We're talking about the hoods here. Kenworth had a one-piece, great big fiberglass hood. Took 2 men and a boy to tip the thing up. And the later one sloped, and that drove me nuts every time I looked at it. The Peterbilt hood, on the other hand, was a nice light aluminum. It was paneled. So if somebody whacked or backed into you, you could replace a panel rather than replacing the whole hood. It would save you money. I like the Pete hood better. But pound for pound, I like both trucks for features. I gave both a Dave score of 4 out of 5. So the Pete gets a 4 and the Kenworth gets a 4. Third category I looked at when I was thinking about the trucks that I'd owned was the track record of each truck, what I had for experiences with each truck. And the Kenworths that I had, the one Kenworth was built in the St. Therese plant, and the cab leaked, and that drove me nuts. Hated that about it. The other problem I had with the Kenworths a lot of the time were the fact that the front grills were chromed and they were cheap chrome. So after a while, the grills would start to rust, and it was expensive to replace those hood pieces, and very time consuming as well. So I didn't like that. But when I looked at the Peterbilt really only had a couple issues with it, but one of them was huge. One of them was an electrical issue. A lot of Peterbilts had this. And when Peterbilts had electrical issues, they tended to catch fire. And when I thought about it, both the Lettuce King and I owned 379s that caught fire. I was backed into a customer's dock when mine caught fire, and the Lettuce King was at an intersection, and his burned right to the axles. So we'll never forget that about the Kenworth and the Pete. Both, as far as recall, factory recall was concerned, they both pulled their parts from the same parts suppliers, so they were on an equal footing for recall, which makes sense. But because the Kenworths never burst into fire, but sometimes the Peterbilts did, I gave the Kenworths a Dave score of 5 out of 5, but I gave the Peterbilts a 3 out of 5 because of those electrical issues. Next category I looked at was pricing. Now, generally as a rule, both of these trucks range within a couple $1,000s of one another, depending on where you are in the country. Depends on the province or the state and the region. A lot of times it depends on which factory you're closer to. For instance, I've noticed that the Kenworths tended to be cheaper when you were looking up in the northwest for them. And if you were down in the south, near the Denton plant at Peterbilts tended to be a little more reasonable. Up here in Ontario where I live, it had always been that the Peterbilt was a couple thousand more than the Kenworth. But what I did this time around, just for the sake of interest, was I called both dealerships. I spec'd identical trucks, identical engine, cab, options, driveline, the whole thing, so they're identical. Priced them both, and this time, to my surprise, the Peterbilt actually came in cheaper by $2,000 than the Kenworth did. Now I'll show you those prices in Canadian. The Kenworth was $198,000 and the Pete was $196,000, but bear in mind those are Canadian prices. But generally, they're pretty comparable as far as price goes, depending on where the country you are. So I gave both of them, I gave both the Kenworth and the Pete a Dave score of 4 out of 5 for each. Finally, the fifth category I scored them in was resale. Now, there'll be some tears here, but there's just no argument. When it comes right down to it, everybody in the trucking industry knows that the red oval, the Peterbilt emblem, that means the highest resale value in the industry, bar none. You just can't argue it. So, for that fact alone, for resale value, I gave Peterbilt the Dave score of 5. Kenworth got a Dave score of 4 in this category. So at the end of this exercise, I totaled up all the scores, and out of a possible score of 25, I had given Kenworth a score of 22 out of 25, and I had given Peterbilt a score of 19 out of 25. But I'm only one guy. This is only my opinion. So we had put up a couple of polls, one on Facebook and one on YouTube, and thank you everyone, by the way, for participating in these polls. Appreciate that. Both the Facebook poll and the YouTube poll, and the YouTube poll, by the way, had over 3,500 votes. Both of those polls scored Peterbilt to be the higher truck. And when I look at the situation, you see more Peterbilts at truck shows than anything else. Clearly, I think it's fair to say that Peterbilt's the more popular truck. There may be some tiers. Kenworth makes a great truck. I always liked the Kenworth. I had great Kenworths. But I like the older Kenworths more than the newer Kenworths, frankly, myself. The new Peterbilts, I've got no argument with. They are the most popular truck on the market, and our scores, our polls show that. So there we are. Peterbilt's the most popular truck on the highway. Finally, a note from my friend the Lettuce King. I asked him why it was he liked Peterbilt so much. He's a long-time Peterbilt guy. He's owned quite a few of them, knows them inside and out, upside and down. He says, I like the way you sit in them. I like the fact that the clutch pedal goes down through the floor. I get in them and they're comfortable. They just fit me like an old pair of boots. And at the end of the day, honestly, either Kenworth or Pete is a great truck. You can't go wrong with either one. They're both great, and I'd have either one in a heartbeat. Take care, stay safe, keep the rubber side down, and we'll see you on the back haul.